Hello and welcome back to another episode of a weekly Worms Point. Today we are playing Worms Armageddon, the second game in the series, and I think it's fair to say the fan favourite. While everyone has their favourite Worms games, and this one, by the way, is not mine, we'll get into that in a little bit. Worms Armageddon is widely regarded as the Worms game, and I think it's fairly obvious to see why it's at the very least more popular than the original version that we played last week. Because if you go back and compare the two, it's night and day in terms of like visual, I mean, maybe not visual fidelity, maybe not graphics, but aesthetic if nothing else. I do have to say though, this is the PC version, which I'm sure has been updated many times over the years. You'll notice that this version of Worms has one of the biggest arsenals out of any of the following games, which I find to be kind of interesting. Now back in the day, when I owned this game on PS1, I didn't like this game. Like, I'm not saying I preferred the original, I'm saying I straight up did not like Worms Armageddon. Maybe I should have gone and played the PlayStation 1 version just to see if it was all that different from the PC version, but I'm having trouble remembering exactly what it was that I had against this game. But I remember Worms was, I mean, like, the pack with almost all of the Worms games in it is one of the first things I ever bought on Steam, and I remember playing through all of them, and even then when I played Armageddon I was like, I'm just not feeling it. I think maybe it's possible that they gave me too much variation, too much freedom of choice, and I didn't quite know how to recreate the Worms experience I enjoyed, because the defaults were a bit different, if I remember right. Maybe this wasn't the case, but I swear I'd load up a game and it would be like 8 worms with 200 health, and I don't know, something about it just wasn't quite the same. But turns out you can just choose 4 worm teams and put them at 100 health. Shock horror. And yeah, looking at it now, I really like the visual style of this game. It's one of the best looking Worms games out there. It's one of the most versatile in terms of options and weapon choice and you know, community maps and that kind of thing. But I strongly believe that when it comes to Worms, your favourite Worms game is probably the Worms game that you're most personally nostalgic for. It's why I love the original game so much, and it's why I love one of the upcoming games so much as well. I should probably address the team names and the worm names. This year is a very hot year for MMOs, that genre in general, and people like to discuss between themselves fairly often what the best MMO is, and my stance on it has very much been, who cares, play them all, lol. You think you don't have time, but if your attention span is anything like mine, you'll dip in and out of them every few months and just rotate through them all. So anyway, I have a team of some of my WoW characters, some of my Elder Scrolls Online characters, some of my Final Fantasy XIV characters, and some of my Guild Wars 2 characters. They are all fighting against each other. And by the end of the match, we will know finally, definitively, just what is the best MMO out there. RuneScape got left off this list because it's not really a character-based MMO, and therefore I don't have 4 different character names of 4 different RuneScape accounts. I would love it if RuneScape introduced a subscription where it's just your Jagex account is a subscription and you can just make as many different characters as you want, because there are different modes in the game these days, but that would lose them a lot of money, I'm sure. But yeah, Worms Armageddon, it's a video game. If you like Worms games, let me know if it's your favourite. I guess it probably is. While we are still on the topic of Worms, and what's going to be happening with this retrospective going forwards, I do need to add, I've been looking at the wiki of all of the different Worms games, and something I've realised is that there will be like one core type of Worms games, and there will be like 6 different versions of it across different platforms and different iterations. While I'm sure a more exhaustive retrospective would look at every single different version of every single different game, I personally am just going to be going with the next. I mean, I might as well just lay it out. Next week we will be looking at Worms Reloaded, which pretty much collects the gameplay of Worms Open Warfare 1 and 2, Worms for iOS, Worms 2 for iOS, Worms A Space Odyssey for Wii, and Worms Battle Islands for Wii and PSP. They're pretty much all the same base game. Worms Reloaded is the PC version of pretty much all of those games. If there is demand for me to go and explore the different versions of these games, then I'm sure I can come back to it at a later date, but I don't think it's going to be all that necessary. I will talk about this more next week, but I have a lot of love for Worms Open Warfare for the PSP, and I went and played that again recently. I was like, oh, this is kind of pointless now that Reloaded exists. For the 3D Worms games, the problem with that is the only real one on Steam is Ultimate Mayhem, which is kind of just Worms 4 Mayhem, but remastered or whatever. and Worms 3D and Worms Forts Under Siege are not really available. So I'm kind of, again, leaving the 3D games out of this, but like if there's demand for it, maybe I'll pick up Ultimate Mayhem and have a look. It may interest you to know that Shrimp No Crust is a black mage in Final Fantasy XIV, and he just offed himself by accident, which is very on brand. He stood still too long. Now let's quickly check in with World of Warcraft: The War Within. There will be no spoilers here, but it's been over a week since launch now. How is it going in that game? I'd say pretty good. At first I was a little bit frustrated because I thought they were time gating the endgame leveling quests to be like one quest every week, which would have taken place over the course of 5 weeks, and I was like, come on man, why are we still doing this? But it seems more like they kind of unlocked it at more of a haphazard rate, like it was either every day or every other day. All I know is Reese was like, oh, have you done this quest yet? And I was like, what? It shouldn't be available yet, what are you talking about? But yeah, in terms of endgame, it's kind of hard to judge because I mean, in general, in World of Warcraft, I'm not the biggest endgame player. My favourite way to play WoW is to just level up a bunch of different characters. But I'm kind of holding out on Season 1 before diving too headfirst into things like the Delves. But I've played some heroic dungeons, and I quite like them. Problem is, people are going through them at 1,000 miles an hour because Mythic Plus isn't out yet, and also tanks are just zooming to the boss they want to get the right loot from and then quitting out. And so we have to queue up for new tanks, and they're not stopping to care about healers' mana pools and stuff. It's quite a toxic environment at the minute. Hopefully when all the raiders can go off and actually get their equipment from raiding, we won't have to sit through that kind of stuff anymore. At least that's my my understanding, is that that's what's happening, and that's the group of players who are behaving that way. But other than that, yeah, they've done some fun stuff with the outdoor world where you get to kind of choose what your weekly overworld activity quest is going to be, whether you want to do world quests or other things that I can't currently remember. I've been working towards unlocking the Irvin. You can't actually finish that yet, but there are certain quest lines you need to do to unlock them, and they're really fun quest lines. But I think in general, what I'm need to spend a lot of time doing, I think, with The War Within is just taking alts through and doing all of these side quests in these zones, because again, I still feel like I don't know some of these zones very well in terms of story and world. I still think the main quest line took us through those zones a little bit too quickly, didn't quite flesh out things enough, didn't quite answer any of the questions that it brought up in a very fulfilling manner. But if I spend more time with the side quests of each zone, I'll probably have a pretty good time. And again, I still want to do that through my ults, because on your main character you can filter out seeing the exclamation marks on quests your ults have done now, which I think is such a good move. It does just make them faded, but that's fine. Last expansion, the main city was full of quest markers that I was ignoring, so I can ignore translucent quest markers a lot better, that's fine. But I gotta be perfectly honest, World of Warcraft is not the MMO I've been spending the most amount of time in this week, and this is different from Dragonflight, because with Dragonflight, I found the leveling process to be a slog, and I found the endgame offerings to be, I know this was an unpopular opinion at the time, but I found the endgame offerings to be kind of boring and not that interesting to me personally, so I kind of left very early into Dragonflight. The reason I haven't spent as much time in The War Within is purely a quirk of my attention span, because one of the communities I'm in, the Grinding Gear community, who normally play Final Fantasy XIV, they're my FC over there, they've recently been getting into Guild Wars 2, and so as I mentioned at the end of last week's video, I finally found a fix for the problems which were stopping me from playing Guild Wars 2, and I've been playing the ever-loving shit out of that game all week. And so while The War Within is brilliant, and it's great, and I want to spend more time in it, I'm currently at the stage where I'm getting into a new MMO properly for the first time, and that is taking up the vast majority of my brain tinglies. The timing was a little bit unfortunate, but hey, if I was fully updated on the story of Guild Wars 2, Janfir Wilds released around the same time as World of Warcraft anyway, so I would probably still be having the same problem. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, about this time last year actually, I was getting into Guild Wars 2. I made my main character a Sylvari Mesmer, and I ran him through most of the main story, and I was quite curious, and I was enjoying it. and I was just getting slowly more and more invested. But sadly, what happened was, around the time that I started getting into these longer kind of personal story instances, I started running into this bug where it would randomly disconnect me from the story instances, and they didn't have any checkpoints, so I had to do the entire thing again, and these were like upwards of half an hour long. The particular problem I had is a very rare bug which affects a seemingly random handful of players and has no proper fix. It has some really weird workarounds that seem to work for some people, and long story short, I finally figured out that if I downloaded a free VPN and had that activated while playing, so far, after a week of intensive play, it has not propped up this issue again. There are also a couple of other factors which are different from the last time I played. I'm running it off of an external SSD, which I don't see why that would solve the problem, but this is one of those problems that would be solved with a fix that you wouldn't see how it would solve the problem. I've also transferred servers, and I'm, to an NA server because that's where the Grinding Gear guild is, and I'm kind of thinking like, if the problem was about randomly getting disconnected from a server, it would be weird if being connected to an NA server would fix that, but that could also be another thing that's changed and fixed it. Either way, it doesn't really matter. What matters is I'm finally able to play Guild Wars 2, and this is something that's been bugging me since I ran into this problem, because I was really enjoying my time in Guild Wars 2, and suddenly it was a game I could no longer play. And not because my PC was outdated or I was having frame rate issues or anything like that, but because of some bizarre, unknowable, really rare bug which had no apparent fix. Oh, and I should also add, I don't know what this accent is. One of the things that initially frustrated me as well is I had just got invested enough in the game to drop a whole bunch of Christmas money on pretty much all of the story up to End of Dragons, including the Living World seasons. They were on sale, and they would not refund me. So needless to say, I'm really happy because I've just spent a week playing through all of Living World Season 1 and the first half of Living World Season 2. And I won't spoil anything, but for those of you who don't know what the Living World seasons are, they're basically kind of like patch content, but for like story. Because it's earlier patch content, it doesn't really introduce much in terms of gameplay. Living World Season 2 does introduce 2 new maps. I've heard that later Living World stories introduce a new map every chapter, which is wild. That sounds like a lot of content. But yeah, it's done the thing of slowly introducing characters to me where I'm like, oh, I see what we're doing here. You're gonna make me invested in these characters, okay, do your best. And then, a few days later, something always happens to one of them, like, no, please be okay. It's not the best storytelling in the world or anything, but I have been learning about the lore of the world of Guild Wars, and I've been downright fascinated by it. The main thing is the 250-year time gap between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2, because I did play a little bit of Guild Wars 1, but more relevantly, when I was feeling ill one day and I was already playing through Guild Wars 2, I decided to watch every single story cutscene for Guild Wars 1 and its expansions, and I also recently looked up like a story synopsis of all of the expansions too. And I've got to say, finishing an MMO and then basing its sequel 250 years in the future gives you leave to do some absolutely wild things with the lore of that world that I absolutely love, and now I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping World of Warcraft will do the same, whether that's with a World of Warcraft 2 or just one of the expansions. Just do like a massive, like, I'm thinking 70-year time skip or something. I've got a whole video bubbling away in the back of my head to talk about there, but we'll leave that for another day and continue talking about Guild Wars 2. My favourite thing, and this is spoilers for like the first hour or two of Guild Wars 1, but my favourite thing is that the human starter area, I mean humans are the only things you can play as in Guild Wars 1, but the starter area for Guild Wars 1 gets bombed and overrun by the Char, who are like this evil race, but in Guild Wars 2, 250 years later, they're not quite as outright villainous, and when you start as a Char, you start in that old human starting area and it's barely recognizable, but there's some really cool lore regarding like what the Human King did to try and fight back against the Char, and it caused this place to be haunted by ghosts forever, and it's so fucking cool. I also just love the concept of having, I mean I haven't, but like the idea of having played through Guild Wars 1 and these events and then just being like, And this is what happened to these characters afterwards, and this is what happened to these civilizations afterwards, and this is the road from the end of this expansion to the start of Guild Wars 2. So goddamn cool. But anyway, to talk more about my gameplay journey in Guild Wars 2, I was having a lot of trouble with my Sylvari Mesmer. I felt so squishy, and despite looking up builds and asking for advice and making sure I had the right stat attributes and the right gear and that kind of thing, I was still taking ages to kill anything in these personal story instances and dying really easily. I felt like I was fighting for my life most of the time, and it was just really frustrating, and I was not happy. So what I did, because these expansions I've already bought ahead of time came with like level 80 boosts, is I did something I almost never do in an MMO. I switched mains. I made a human necromancer called Rin Idleheart, and I boosted her to level 80, and she is so much easier to play with because I legitimately looked up like easiest Guild Wars 2 class to play. But not only is she easier to play the game with, she's also much more fun in my opinion to play the game with like her skills loadout and stuff. For those wondering, I'm using main hand staff, and then like it's mostly conjuring familiars. And now I can actually play through the story of this game without dying every 5 minutes and failing upwards, you know? The two main obstacles to my enjoyment of Guild Wars 2 have finally been solved. I also kind of can't stop making alts in Guild Wars 2, which is going to be a problem very quickly because there's a limited number of character slots and then you have to buy more. But if you've noticed, the characters on my Worms team, Dremis is that Sylvari Mesmer I mentioned, Rin Idleheart I just mentioned is my human necromancer, then I have Margrim Vanguard who's a Char warrior, and I don't remember who else I put on this team, but I have Fen Veramir who's a human elementalist, I have Bardic Ursol, who is a Norn Guardian, and I've just made Aurora Cyan, who is a Norn Revenant. I have plans as well. I want to make a Sylvari Ranger. I want to have 2 Asura characters, one a thief, one an engineer. And does that account for every class in the game? It might do. Yeah, that's all 9 of them. But even then, like, they've all got elite specializations, which it would be worth having specific characters for, I'm sure, if I'm a super alt dude. But I don't love having to buy character slots, so I'll probably have to kind of, you know, be a bit more sensible in that game. But yeah, it's my first time having a main character in an MMO who's, you know, female, a lady. And while I've played female characters in the past, it's interesting having her as like my main story focused character, and I really like it. I don't know why, it feels right. Maybe it's because when I was watching all the Guild Wars 1 cinematics, the player character in those videos was a female human as well, so it just kind of feels consistent with the Guild Wars 2 universe that the strongest people in that world are human ladies. Guild Wars 2 humans are also way more interesting than humans in any other fantasy universe where you can choose to play as something else. Like, they're not crazy interesting, but they definitely got interesting lore, and the way they're designed as well I quite like. Makes me realise I just might not like Warcraft's humans very much. But anyway, as you can see, the game has ended in a draw. I swear I didn't mean for this to happen. You could see me planning my escape route beforehand and I thought I'd be able to get out of there. But this means, who's the best MMO of them all? All of them are. Always were. So thank you very much for watching this episode of A Weekly Waypoint. Let me know what you thought down below. Are you a Guild Wars 2 enjoyer? If not, would you ever consider giving the game a go? I don't know. Call to engagement. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.